Hey everyone, welcome back to another One More Thing where Pastor Eric's going to share a little bit more on his previous message about Caiaphas and this villain series that we've been going over. Just kind of looking at more things, diving deeper into some of the things that was really make that message more powerful, more impactful. So, Pastor Eric, what you got for us?
So, first thing I wanted to share today was about Paul. He was a Pharisee. So, I think it's very interesting before he became a Christian that he was very zealot in that. And we find that in Philippians chapter 3, verse 5, about him being a Pharisee. So, the whole idea that, sometimes it's easy to think, as I mentioned, about, the Pharisees are more conservative, that the Sadducees were more liberal in the sense of that day and age. But that doesn't mean that the conservatives were right, because they were the ones seeking Jesus to be crucified or killed off, I should say, particularly. They're the ones that brought it to the attention of the Sadducees, and they worked together to see Jesus die. And then so after Jesus' death and resurrection, you have Paul, who is a Pharisee that we could label as a conservative, and what is he doing? He's actively trying to pursue Christians that are serving Jesus and proclaiming Jesus. So this wasn't a liberal thing or a conservative thing. Both groups, Sadducees and the Pharisees, were both wanting to see Christianity wiped out as a whole. So, we need to keep that in mind. And of course, I don't want to say that when I say most of them, there was, of course, people that realized, like Nicodemus and Jehoshaphat, I think or Joseph, who took the body of Jesus. All those recognized that Jesus was the Messiah, but yet they weren't at the trial. So
I remember you pointed that out in the message that like Nicodemus wasn't there. So there were some that weren't there, and I did love how you broke down the differences of kind of like the right trial and it did everything so shady, and when you put listed out like that, it makes it so obvious. Not all of the council was there. Some were missing, and of course, you mentioned Nicodemus was part of among that crew. I thought that was really fascinating, that because no one really probably thinks about those things about how that trial went.
Well, and the problem with that in general, all the issues, and then the fact there wasn't just one issue, there was multiple issues, right? There was meeting at night. They weren't supposed to meet before us. The first sacrifice was given that morning. That they were rushing all this to be done in a particular format and in a way, but it ruins the judicial system of just and fairness, right? Mm-hmm. It totally shows the corruption that was there, that there was no fair trial. And to be fair, to be a judge, you're supposed to be impartial. You're supposed to hear all the evidence, good and bad, and try to make a truth statement. Mm-hmm. And that's really the shame of the whole process. And going into that too, we could talk about Judas. And of course, he received 30 pieces of silver. And then what happens after he, betrays Jesus? He takes the money back. Well, they don't want to accept the money back, right? Because it's innocent blood's money, right? It's a bribe that was given to pull Jesus in, and they reject it, and they use it for something else, but they can't receive it back, or they can't take it back because it's the blood of the innocent. Yeah. And so there's that acknowledgement too that there was something wrong with the whole process, that they even acknowledged that they couldn't take it.
To some degree,
Yeah, and just like they didn't want to go and speak to Pilate before, they wanted Pilate to come out to them because they didn't want to go into the palace and be unclean of any type, because they wanted to eat, the Passover. So they wanted to maintain their, status as far as being these individuals that were chief priests, but yet they weren't, willing to do it with Jesus as far as creating a fair trial and a fair opportunity. The other thing that you think about is that typically in the Old Testament, you'd have a high priest that would be till his lifetime, right? So there were actually 12 living people that were during Jesus's time that were at one point a high priest. So you had 12 different people that had been the high priests, but yet you're only supposed to have one, and it's supposed to be for their lifetime. So it goes to show again that the system itself was corrupt. And then the last part I think I'd like to share, we can talk a little bit more if we have time, but the biggest thing I wanted to share was the fact that Jesus was tried by 3 different courts, if you think about it. The judicial system for the high priest, the Sanhedrin, as they looked at Jesus that way. And of course, they came up with that charge of blasphemy. And then he went to Pilate, and then he also went to King Herod. So in a sense, you're thinking about the spiritual aspect he's judged, and he's considered that he is not the Son of God. He's making a false claim of being the Son of God, and they're saying he's not.
Yeah.
And then you go to Herod, and he's the king of the Jews at the time, even though we understand it's not the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's more of like a governorship of the kingdom because of Rome being the occupier. But he's being judged by King Herod, and so King Herod doesn't want to make a judgment call on Jesus because he's conflicted about truth. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we see Pilate, and I would say that's the worldly aspect. That's the outside world looking at Jesus and saying, okay, this man's innocent. Mm-hmm. Because the 2 charges, again, the charges changed too, and I think that's interesting too. Here you had the judicial system of the Jewish priest judging Jesus and saying that he's committed blasphemy, right? But when they come to Pilate, they can't say that because they know Pilate doesn't care about that. That's not going to be important to him, but he makes it, they bring it to him that he's, the one that's causing riots, right? Disruptor and causing a rebellion. But we find that in the Garden of Gethsemane, when Jesus is praying and everything, and they come to arrest him, what happens? Peter takes a sword, cuts one of the servants' ears off, and Jesus heals it. Mm-hmm. And then he tells them to put away their swords, mm-hmm. right? So in that instance, it's a classic witness that people could have testified even just about that. Mm-hmm. Is Jesus an insurrectionist, or is he somebody that's wanting to create peace?
Based on the claims from, the Pharisees and all of them that he's such a disruptor and chaos, it would make sense that if he comes to get arrested, that he's going to go down fighting.
Yeah.
But totally the opposite. And I think it's, kind of fascinating to look at all this and even look at all the movies and TV shows we have today where we do this. They do the same thing. They portray the same thing. They try to do a trial and manipulate it in a way that's going to be favorable to them and all this stuff like that when it's almost getting based upon this ultimate trial right here, way back in the day, to where there's so many things that, like you're saying, they were spinning it based upon who they were coming to, with Herod, with Pilate and all that. And
well, if you think about it, the story of Jesus' trial and execution is probably one of the most tragic stories mm-hmm. That's ever been written. I mean, and it's the fact that it's a true story is even more gut-wrenching. The fact that you have severe betrayal by one of your closest friends, one of the people he poured his life into, betrays him in that way, to give him not only to betray him, but then to give him a kiss, and he calls him a friend.
Yeah.
And then so he's with him in his ministry all those years, and then he betrays him. But then you see all the disciples run away and flee. You have Peter deny Jesus. Mm-hmm. And then you have all these people coming with false claims and false information. But you also look at the fact that how Jesus responded to that whole situation. To me, how Jesus responded through that whole process even speaks to me that he's God's son. Because no one else would handle that in that way at every turn. Yeah. That he handled himself in such a way that he was speaking truth, he was seeking truth, he was asking for us to look at the truth and see the evidence.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of, is like it. You went over the process that they all had to do, the 3 different things, the pre-trial, trial, all that, and there was little to no defense coming from. Yet it needed to go through all that. Like, you think coming into it with Jesus, little no defense, one person or one judgment and be done. No, it took a longer process with a defendant with little to no, but that just proves the point that he is the Son of God, and there was a plan and purpose. It needed to go through all those stages without him fighting back, without, he spoke truth, that's all he did, and very little moments of that, but it needed to go through that process and still end up the way that God designed it to.
Yeah.
That's so fascinating.
And if I go back to that point I was trying to make, I just want to make it clear that he was rejected by the godly, right?
Yeah.
By the priests.
Yeah.
He was rejected by the kingship of not being willing to stand up for Jesus, King Herod. And then he was rejected by the world.
Yeah.
And so Jesus, here is an innocent man who's been convicted. And the question is, like I pose, if this is the Son of God, that's the question we should ask, looking at the evidence, looking at everything, that Jesus was totally innocent in this. He had done nothing wrong, nothing of deserving death, for sure. And that's what I love about Jesus when he goes and in his pretrial, he says, those that, listen to my testimony and go and ask other people what I said. I mean, you don't have to hear my words. Go and verify it. I've never done anything in secret. I love that part where he didn't speak. He spoke openly to the world, everything he taught.
Yeah.
So, I think that's cool stuff. And I've been enjoying this series because it kind of challenges me to see things in maybe a different aspect. And I hope it does for other people, because sometimes we rush these stories. And I think seeing it from the villain side, as we approach it that way, it kind of opens our eyes to maybe have a different take, because oftentimes we just see it from Jesus's angle and not see it from the heart of those enemies.
It definitely exercises our discernment, because we know and we can study what is right, but if we look at all of the villain and that side of things, it also helps us discern to recognize those and in our own life, or similar things or things like that. So it definitely helps exercise that discernment in us. So
yeah.
Anything else?
No, I think that's good.
Good. Yeah. Yeah. It's a great series. Great topic on Caiaphas. And so next week is the last week.
We got Jezebel this week, and your favorite David.
Oh, and David. Jezebel and David. David is a villain. So
just in this series.
Yeah. So be sure to check out the next couple of weeks. Go back and check out Caiaphas and maybe the previous weeks if you've missed them. We'll look forward to more kind of diving deeper into these villains and into the message and see what God really reveals to us. So thank you so much for checking us out, and we'll see you next time.